All right, friends. Tonight is a special night for our Creators Call Learning series. We are privileged to have author and activist Seth Klein with us, engaging questions that have arisen in our circle as we've reflected on a good war, mobilizing Canada for the climate emergency. Seth, big thank you for being here. We are so grateful for your presence with us, for your incredible work and organizing efforts. We really hope that you'll come away from tonight encouraged by the kinds of discussions that you are helping to animate within faith communities that are trying to discern and figure out what our part is as we collectively try to address the climate crisis. Well, as you all know, my name is Steve Heinrichs, and together with my co-host Ian Funk, we are glad to serve as facilitators for this climate series on behalf of Mennonite Church Canada. And I think I've said this each and every week, but we truly mean it. We are so thankful that all of you are here, that you're doing the work, you're reading sometimes 80 pages a week, and you're gathering together from across a diversity of spiritual communities and non-faith backgrounds to spur each other on. And we pray that you'll all be inspired and challenged by tonight's conversation. And on that note, let me share how this evening will proceed. So Seth is going to take a bit of time off the hop to share how A Good War has been received over the past couple of years, letting us know about the important work of the Climate Emergency Unit and whatever else he feels would be good for this group. Then Ian and I will engage Seth in a series of questions that you all have crafted and put before us, either on that Google Doc, some of you privately emailed me. So Seth, if you've got any issues with the questions, you know who to blame. Ian and I, bold leaders that we are not taking any responsibility. All right. We're going to engage Seth in conversation until 8-ish p.m. Central Time. And then we'll break off into pairs for short discussion and then come back to the larger group and wrap things up at 8:30. I hope that plan resonates with you. I think this is going to be just an amazing evening. In one moment, I'm going to hand it off to Ian to introduce Seth. But as I do, I'm going to invite you all to open up your chat and to write one or two words that communicates how A Good War has impacted you in a good way. Something important that you appreciate or that you've learned from this text. And we'll just let those good words fill up the chat as we move along, and Seth can see how truly grateful we are for his work. All right, over to you, Ian.
Well, I too welcome you all, and welcome Seth Klein, our author here today. I just met Seth 15 minutes ago. So for all of you who don't know Seth as well as I do, we have words of introduction. Seth is he lives in my neck of the woods. He lives in West Vancouver with his wife, Christine Boyle, who is a city councillor for Vancouver. They live there with their two children. Where I have become familiar with Seth Klein's work is through the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, and used to get letters from him all the time, and it says here in his bio that the Centre for Policy Alternatives is a public policy research institute committed to social, economic, and environmental justice. For me, it was more just a breath of fresh air in a discussion about public policy where really we were told there was only one way of doing things, and we're being told that, you know, if we wanted to care about people who are marginalized, the poor, I wanted to care about our planet, that if we weren't taking our cues from the market, or we weren't taking our cues from big business, that we were just really dreamers. So for me, this Canadian Center for Policy Alternatives gave me some sound thinking, some sound research and data that said, you know, I might be a dreamer, but I'm a dreamer with good reason, and there are better ways and good ways. So that is what that has meant to me, and I feel it's been some good and profound work that Seth has done through that organization. He was there for 22 years, and he was the founding director of the BC office. Other things that he's been involved with the BC Poverty Reduction Coalition, also a founder and advisor to the Metro Vancouver Living Wage for Families campaign, where they created a sort of a methodology for saying this is a living wage for a family of 4. That's been an amazing tool for anyone advocating for child poverty and so on. I've accessed it a number of times, and so it's been significant work for sure. One other thing that project, I think it's associated with the Policy Alternatives Center, is this program for leadership among young people called Next Up, and that is emboldening and teaching and our youth, helping them be leaders as they're particularly concerned about justice and our environment. This is some work that we're coming to in a fresh way in the church, specifically around climate change, and I pray that the church, and I pray that initiatives like Next Up help us to not just listen to our kids, but say, yeah, you kids, our youth, you're telling us exactly what we need to hear, and yeah, let's get to work together. Another thing that more recently that Seth has been involved with, he's the team lead and director of strategy for the Climate Emergency Unit, which, as far as I can tell, is a follow-up to this book, and he may say a couple more words about it. So Seth Klein, thank you very much again for joining us, and I hand it over to you to say a word or two, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Great, thank you, Ian. And thank you so much, Steve. Thanks for this invitation. Nice to see you all. Even if you're all on mute, it's nice to see your faces. And so many of you, and from so many places. I actually thought this was just a Winnipeg gathering, but you appear to be from all over the place. That was my misunderstanding. First of all, I just want to thank you for your interest, and I have met up with a few book clubs, but you are the largest, and I'm just well, I'm really honored that you've decided to take this kind of in-depth dive into the book. Grateful that the Mennonites have organized this event, and also been watching what you've been doing in your own call to your own leadership. Is it the seven calls? Yeah, that's fantastic. And maybe in discussion, we'll talk more about the role of faith institutions in meeting the climate emergency moment. I'm thrilled looking at the chat, at the comments people have made, and in particular that the book is, it has been very gratifying to me that so many people find the book hopeful. It's a loaded proposition. I wrestle with it myself, and of course the subject matter is dire, and the time is short. But I was trying to do that, and I'm glad to see that. By the way, Ian, I just need to clarify one thing from your intro. My wife and I reside in East Vancouver. Which, if you're from out here, you don't want to confuse the two. It's a big difference. And
yes, I did wonder. My eyebrows rose.
Yeah. And I should say too, I mean, I gather you've all read up to chapter 8. Some of you may have jumped ahead. I kind of hope you have. My favorite chapters come after chapter 8. But you read the intro, and so you know that my own background, like many of you, is in the peace movement. And I say like many of you because I know my first encounter as a secular Jewish kid from Montreal with Mennonites was in the peace movement. You know, that's when I started to meet Mennonites, because I was traveling across the country when I was 18 in a peace and disarmament project. And when I came through Winnipeg, I can't remember their names. I feel bad about this, but I was billeted with a Mennonite family, but I don't remember their name. Maybe some of you know. The chapters that, for those of you who have only gotten up to chapter 8, the chapters that come, I hope you'll like. Chapter 9 is around Indigenous leadership. And then these chapters on the cautionary tales are yet to come. I mean, you've read the part of the book in which I'm lauding what the government did in World War II, but the chapters to come signal the ways in which we have to do it different. And then there's a discussion about the role of leadership. I want to say more about what I'm doing now with the Climate Emergency Unit, but I'll hold off, and I'm sure that will come up in discussion, except to say, as Ian was alluding to, once the book came out, I started to meet with policymakers and political leaders who wanted to talk about the book. Funny thing about writing a book is you get a meeting with these guys, but really you can only do so much when you're just a guy with a book. And I realized, having left the CCPA 3 years ago, that I needed an institutional home again to follow up these meetings, to start to build a drumbeat of political pressure behind the emergency ideas in the book. And that's when David Suzuki and Tara Cullis gave me this home with the David Suzuki Institute to create what we call the Climate Emergency Unit, this 5-year project. I will actually just share, now that I'm talking about it, here's the link for those of you who are interested in learning more about the Climate Emergency Unit. And you can also, and I hope you will, you'll see at the bottom of each page, well, I'll give you the link to this too. I hope you'll sign up for our newsletter, because that's the easiest way to stay informed about the campaigns that we're initiating. We're trying to create coalition tables, provincially, federally, sectorally, behind different campaigns that all come out of the ideas in the book. And there's the link to sign up for the newsletter in the chat there. But before I open it up to discussion, I just wanted to say, so, I mean, since the book came out, I've probably given about, 120, 130 talks, but I'm not going to do that. This is a Q&A. And when I give a talk, it's often with people who haven't read the book like you have. But because you're a book club, I wanted to just offer a few comments about, booky comments, some literary observations and what it's like to have a book. This is the first book I've ever written. Certainly the most creative thing I've ever done. As Ian said, I spent 22 years with the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives writing policy reports. I don't want to undervalue them. They were pretty good, but they weren't exactly gripping writing. When I set out to write a book, I actually spent time meeting with real writer friends to get their counsel. And they all said a few things in common. One is that when you write a book, it's not enough to talk to people's heads, because that's what we do at CCPA, but also to talk to their hearts. So I tried to do that. And they also said, with a book, you've got to have a narrative. And if you might have noted in the introduction, when the original book outline only had a single chapter on the Second World War. But as I dug into that story, I started to see more and more parallels between then and now, but also so much story, so much narrative. And it was like, oh yeah, this is going to make a great hook. But it didn't just lend me this nice structure and narrative hook. It also really jolted my thinking about emergencies. I mean, I've been on the climate file for close to 2 decades, but it made me look at this material with fresh eyes through the lens of emergency. and became this exercise. I mean, I'm an interloper in the realm of history, but it became this really fun historic excavation that I hoped could liberate our imagination about what's possible. Now that all happened before the book came out. What I didn't anticipate, and then of course, you know, I shipped the book off for final copy edit 3 days before the first lockdown. And as you can imagine, that threw me for a tizzy. I made a very conscious choice, as you saw, which is that I did not touch the text post-pandemic, except for writing that appendix. Although I think it holds up in funny ways, right? But here I was thinking we needed this historic reminder of how quickly we're capable of shifting and pivoting. And now we've all lived through this shared experience. What I really didn't anticipate until being out in the world with the book and giving all of these talks was how incredibly resonant this 80-year-old story remains for so many people who either have a family connection or an institutional connection. And the really fun part about being out there giving these talks with the book is, no matter who the audience, you know, maybe they're mostly liberals or New Democrats or journalists or farmers or architects or business people or labor people, they've all got this institutional connection to this story. And I get to make a little mischief with each of these audiences and pull these characters from their story, these people who are important to their sense of purpose and legacy, and who they admire for doing something great in this moment of calling. And then I get to say, right, and here we are again. And who do you want to be? And that's been really fun. All right, I think I should stop there and let's just go to Q&A.
Thanks so much, Seth. It's super helpful background, and I loved how you use the word calling right now, and I think that's what this group is trying to discern, is like what are our roles and responsibilities in this time. When we began this study, we started off asking a heart question, probably because it was just, you know, an easy way to get to know folks in the circle. And so I thought it might be interesting to go back to that heart question with you. We haven't taken an abacus poll, but I think most, if not everyone in this circle, really appreciates a good war. Many are taken by the hope that it offers, that if we transform and mobilize the economy once, we can do it again. Many of us are inspired by, you know, that 14-point battle plan, you know, that there's a vision for action. But there's this other thing that we really appreciate about good war, and that's the urgency we can feel in this text. Mm-hmm. Your passion and your concern to address, I was sharing with a friend, I love the fact that you use damn a few times in the text, right? Like this damn emergency. Because I think a lot of us like, yeah, this is so, this is our time, mm-hmm. Right? So, yeah, go for it.
Well, I was just going to say, that's right. I mean, I was feeling increasingly panicked. That was my main impetus for writing the book. Panicked as a parent, panicked in general. I mean, when the CCPA British Columbia office decided to take on climate in that fateful decision we made in the mid-2000s, you're then obliged to follow the science. And the more you do, the more alarmed one becomes. And when you're at the CCPA all of those years, I mean, you're forever in that space between what you think is needed and should happen and what our policymakers seem prepared to consider, but no more so than on climate, where there is this gap. And it was, as I say, causing me some anxiety. And I just sat through, I guess I was long enough in the tooth with different government consultations where I just had become tired of the incremental mode that we were stuck in. And that I think 40 years of neoliberalism contributes to, right? That's the point around what Alex Himmelfarb, I think, said, and I shared in the book, that the most damning, if you will, legacy of 40 years of neoliberalism is the sapping of our imagination and our faith, in our capacity to do great things together. And so we just default to incremental mode. And most mainstream environmental groups also default to incremental mode. It's all we've known. It's what we're comfortable in. And again, I wanted to give that a jolt.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned like living in this moment where we are in the long emergency. Clearly, you're writing this book because you want to help mobilize dramatic change, social change right now. And we're curious, how, over the last couple of years, how have you felt about what you've seen in the last while? Like, are you feeling differently? Are your emotions deepened over since you first wrote this book till now?
Because of the pandemic of the last 2 years, or because of just evolving events on the climate file?
Yeah, it could be pandemic. It could be COP26. It could be, seeing that there is a shift, or seeing, like, I don't know. What are you feeling at this time?
Well, I don't want to blow the last chapter for those of you who haven't read it yet. But the truth is, we live in this ambiguous time, right? And I start the book that way and I end the book that way. We do not know if we're going to do this in time. And the last 2 years of climate policy haven't made me particularly more optimistic about that. You see that chart at the beginning where I have Canada's greenhouse gas emissions going back the last 20 years, and it's basically just a plateaued flat line, right? I do think that with the federal measures we've seen in the last couple of years, the data will now start to go down, but not nearly at the slope that is required. And as Bill McKibben says, to win slowly on climate is to lose. And when I've engaged with federal, I've met with a few federal cabinet ministers about the book, and I try to be forthright, kindly way, that their approach isn't going to work, and it's not going to work because they're trying to incentivize their way to victory. And that's the point of the World War II story. We need to drive change with what you've heard me talk about. Some of you probably, well, maybe I should just quickly share it. Have you made me a co-host? Can I share it now? If you make me a co-host, I'll quickly share my slide with the 4 markers of emergency.
You should have it now.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. You see my 4 markers of emergency? You got to spend what it takes to win, create new economic institutions to get the job done, right? That's what C.D. Howe does in chapter 6. And the spending is the chapter you just read, chapter 8, right? Shift from voluntary to mandatory measures. And 4th, tell the truth. So in different ways, I think the federal government, well, we did all of these things in World War II. We kind of did them in the pandemic, certainly in the first year of the pandemic. But we don't do any of those things on climate yet. And if you go to the webpage with the link I gave you, you can dig into those 4 markers more. But I keep, my take, because I've been out with the book in the pandemic, not on a national tour like I was supposed to. It's all been virtual like this. But it means that while the book was about World War II, all of the discussions are about the overlapping similarities and differences between these 3 emergencies: the war, the pandemic, the climate. And, my takeaway from these 3 things is that all emergencies have these 2 things in common. One, they all begin with denial. All emergencies start with a period of denial. And that should give us some solace, shouldn't it? Right? Because as those of us who have the fortitude to face the science on climate, the fact that we're not moving at high speed yet, at speed and scale, we can take solace from the fact that all emergencies start with a period of denial. But the second observation is that once we get it, once we truly shift into emergency mode, things become possible that at a speed and scale that we can't quite imagine. And that moment is yet to come on climate, but it will come. The only question is, will it come in time?
Thanks, Seth. And one of the things that I so appreciate is the whole discussion on leadership to help make the transition. So Ian has a question or a set of questions from the group on leadership.
First, I'd like to say sorry about the East-West thing. I had East in my mind, but it blurted out West. I don't know what happened. My apologies. What draws me into your book is, going back to your discussion about the authors that you spoke to while you were envisaging what you're going to write. I would say that what I read it is true heart. I think you're very genuine. So it's sort of a heart to heart sort of conversation. So I've appreciated that. It's a you have a very trustworthy voice because you're speaking from a very genuine kind of passion. So throughout A Good War, you talk about the need for bold leadership in all sectors of life, but particularly in the political realm. Julie Donor, a member of our circle here, asks, perhaps with some frustration, is there anyone currently in political office that approaches the vision that you've articulated? We could bring to mind various members of parliament who have been a part of those grassroots climate movements. Folks like Leah Gazan of Winnipeg Centre and Peter Julian, New Westminster Burnaby. But I think there's a larger question. Maybe it's something like, how do we help create bold leaders, and how do we do it quickly, in a matter of years or even months?
Oh, great question. I feel like the question's a bit of a setup, though. Well, you'll see from where I go with it. Well, there are those leaders among us. There are climate champs in the House of Commons, including the ones you mentioned and others. There's some provincial ones. There's some municipal ones. And I list some of them in one of the last chapters. One of them I list is my wife. So my wife is Vancouver City Councillor Christine Boyle, who Steve knows because she was active in faith and fossil fuel work before she went into politics. She like so many nice Jewish boys from Montreal, I'm married to a United Church minister. She's a United Church minister, and now she's Vancouver City Councillor. And she was the city councillor who moved the climate emergency motion in Vancouver, which was the first in English Canada. And let me say something about her and that. The outcome of that, I mean, lots of municipalities have passed climate emergency declarations. Most of them are symbolic. They're all wrestling with how to put meat on the bones on those. The Vancouver one is not. Vancouver actually has a climate emergency plan. They're spending money at a significant level for a municipality. They're creating new institutions and neighborhood energy utilities and things like that. But in particular, well, on telling the truth, they're doing something important on telling the truth. Here's the problem with the polling, which you saw in chapter 3. If you poll Canadians and you say, are you increasingly worried about the climate crisis? Yes, I am. Do you think the government needs to do more? Yes, I do. And what do you think they should do? And they go right to recycling and plastics, because that's what we've had, on the table for 20 years. The bad news on the kind of climate literacy front is that only about half of the public correctly understands that the main source of global warming is the combusting of fossil fuels. Now, so the city of Vancouver is having a kind of reality moment with the public in the public education work that they're doing to say, actually, it's what you're burning in your home and in your vehicle. Particularly your home, that's almost 60% of municipal greenhouse gas emissions. And then what are they doing about it? Well, that brings me back to marker 3, move from voluntary to mandatory measures. Almost all the climate policies we have seen to date from our federal and provincial governments of every political stripe is voluntary. We encourage change, we incentivize change, we give rebates, we send price signals. What we don't do is require. The city of Vancouver is requiring. The city of Vancouver has passed in their climate emergency plan 3 years ago, and it came into effect this January 1st, last month. New buildings in Vancouver cannot heat with fossil fuels. And they have a regulatory system in place that basically, as of 2025, whenever your furnace or boiler goes, you won't be able to replace it with gas. You'll have to switch to electric. Those two measures alone will account for about half of the GHG reductions in Vancouver over this decade. And it's not a choice, it's mandatory. So in substance, it's a real plan. Sorry, I'm giving you a long-winded answer, Ian. But you know, when Chris brought that forward, she brought the motion forward. So the first thing that happened that was interesting was, you know, we have a very odd, you know, we have a very split council in Vancouver. They're all over the political map. No one has a majority. You never know how this gang is going to vote on anything. Except that motion passed unanimously. Now, how did that happen? It happened because often what you need for these wins, I think about them as like 3 prongs that you need ideally in place for a policy win. You need some senior civil servants, public servants who are committed to this, which Vancouver had. You need the outside pressure, and you need a political champion. Chris was that political champion. And then the outside pressure came especially from the young people. Each time these votes were coming forward, dozens of mostly high school students skipped school. They rallied outside. They spoke before council. They filled the galleries, and they watched, and they basically made it politically impossible for even the conservative councillors to vote no. Now, once those things passed, Chris became the councillor who was working with the staff on the development of the plan and pushing them to be as bold as possible. And I want to offer you a litmus test for assessing climate plans wherever you live, okay? When the plan was finally done, and the city senior managers presented it to Fortis BC, which is our big gas company, they quickly got a reaction of the gas company setting their hair on fire. And that night, when Chris and I were going to bed, she said, "Okay, now I know we got a good plan." Because here's the point about the leadership question there. Most of our political leaders are still, and I'm about to use this word advisedly, they're in appeasement mode. They want to have climate plans, but they want to have fossil fuel companies on the stage with them announcing it, saying we can live with this plan. And what I'm saying is, unless these climate plans are making those fossil fuel companies deeply anxious, they're probably not, at this late hour, they're probably not climate plans worth having. So there's your little shorthand test. But it means for political leaders, you know, political leaders often hope for people to just like stuff. They want everyone to like everything. You actually, you know, to quote FDR in the 30s, used to be ready to welcome their hate, some of them.
Thanks so much for that, Seth. You know, as someone who's working within a faith institution, when I read the leadership stuff, so much of that I can apply in our own context, right? It's the same tensions about how do you follow, whose lead are you following, constituency, or can leaders lead and bring along, all those same questions. So here's
By the way, let me say one last thing about that. When the plan was finally done, I don't want to name any names here, but one of the questions she immediately got asked before it was made public was, have you polled on this? Never dawned on her. Why would you poll on what needs to happen?
Yeah, you can't debate the mass. As you know. All right. Well, as you know, Seth, this learning series is being hosted by a church denomination, and around the circle here we have representatives from a variety of faith communities: Anglican, Quaker, Catholic, Baptist, Unitarian, and more. In a good war, we hear lots about the state, about corporations, labor, Indigenous communities, but there's not much said about faith communities and our roles and responsibilities. And that's not a critique. When I read it, I was just like, it shows that we're not doing enough. That was a takeaway that I had. So we're wondering here in this circle, what would you like to see faith communities engage? What strengths do you see that we have to bring to the movement? And what are our weaknesses that we need to address in order to play our part in concerted fashion? Now, I know we need to lift up these questions and wrestle with them ourselves, but we're wondering as well, to someone who's, you're rubbing up with faith communities too. What kind of insights do you have?
Good question. Well, the first observation I would make is that, with some notable exceptions, including what you folks are doing with the call for the 7 actions, the faith sector, if I can call it that, has been, sorry, Stephen, say it again, it's been too damn quiet on the climate emergency. And that matters because in a moment like this, we need moral leadership. And I do think, in an old-fashioned way, that faith leaders play that role, should play that role. And it's been lacking. And even when it comes, it's not. I mean, I'm struck, for example, that a few years ago we had this incredible encyclical from the Pope, Laudato Si, but I don't hear the leadership of the Catholic Church in Canada animating that in any way. Not politically, maybe within their congregations, I wouldn't know. But each denomination needs to be figuring that out. Now, I want to come back to my 4 markers of emergency to answer your question. The 4 markers were written with an eye, particularly to federal and provincial governments. How do you know when a government is actually in emergency mode? But in the work that we do with the Climate Emergency Unit, our point is actually that you can apply these 4 markers to the leadership of any large institution, a post-secondary institution, a union, a major economic sector, a crown corporation, a media institution, and a faith institution. So, is your faith institution spending what it takes to get the job to win? In particular, capital spending, I think that's particularly true around buildings. Is it creating new institutions to get the job done? They may be educational institutions, they may be changes to how you conduct your work around how people get around. Is the leadership of the church flying all over the place? Changing the food systems for your events. So it could be that. Shifting from voluntary and mandatory really means, are you setting clear dates where the buildings just have to be electrified and converted? Are you setting clear dates for the divestment of all of the endowments or funds of the faith institution, to divest from fossil fuels, which is urgent and important for a number of reasons. Not only because continuing to invest in fossil fuels is simply risky, it's financially risky as the world comes to terms with this, is legally risky as some of these fossil fuel companies get sued for their inaction and blocking of and damages that their product is producing. But it's mostly, particularly for a faith institution, there is at its core an intergenerational justice issue. For a faith institution or pension fund to be betting on fossil fuels is to bet against the children and future generations of your own institution. The only way you win is if they lose. It does well financially for now, if they live in a hellscape. And that fourth marker, well, that's your business, ain't it? Tell the truth. And that works in both directions. It means congregations hearing that truth on a regular basis from the pulpit, and it means the leadership of the church also communicating it to political leaders, that this call is urgent, and that we are stuck in incremental mode, and that has to stop. I don't know if this also works as shorthand in answer to that question, but it does strike me, this is where you have a little fun with the metaphor I'm playing with in the book. It strikes me that when you attended church in World War II, everything about the experience told you you were going to church at a time of emergency. Does it feel that way today?
Yeah, great question. That would be an awesome question for our communities to wrestle with. Does it feel like we're gathering in an emergency as we come into the sanctuary, as we're worshiping together? Ian has a couple. We're going to go back to the pandemic. He has a couple COVID-related questions.
Yeah, so some people in our group were interested in hearing you reflect more on COVID. Cheryl Welk and Connie Mueller ask, how does the state's response and the public's response to COVID support contrast with or provide new insights about your message for mobilization? And Julie Donner wonders whether you think we can use the economic inequalities revealed by the pandemic to kickstart a Green New Deal in a similar way to how the inequality of the Depression was used to kickstart World War II mobilization.
Yeah, there's a lot in those questions. I see so many overlaps and similarities, but also some important differences between the climate emergency and the pandemic experience. So first of all, again, when you think of those four markers, so spend what it takes to win. This is where I think there's something quite hopeful to be pulled from our pandemic experience. And I'm gonna hit you with some numbers here. I'm a recovering economist, so I'm gonna hit you with some numbers, okay? Just by way of contrast. For most of the first year of the pandemic, the Bank of Canada, our federal central bank, was buying up federal government securities in order to finance the CERB and the wage subsidy primarily, but the overall emergency response, to the tune of $5 billion a week for most of that first year. In contrast, Trudeau government spending on the climate is between $5 and $7 billion a year. $5 billion a week, $5 billion a year. Now, I don't think we actually need to spend at the level as we did in the first year of the pandemic for the climate emergency. You just finished chapter 8. So what you know is that, I asked if we were to take the advice of Nicholas Stern and spend 2% of Canada's GDP on the climate response, it's equivalent to about $40 billion a year. These are big numbers, right? But think about that for a second. $40 billion a year means, can we ask the federal government and the Bank of Canada to do for 8 weeks a year what they did for the entire year of the pandemic, of the first year of the pandemic? Yes, we can. I mean, the scope of what's possible has been laid bare. And after all of these years of being told there's never any money for homelessness and poverty and climate, turns out when our governments recognize an emergency, the money is there. That's a useful lesson. Secondly, if you had said to me a few months before the pandemic, are there people at Finance Canada and the Bank of Canada capable of quickly pivoting in the space of a few weeks and creating these audacious new programs like the CERB and the wage subsidy? I hate to tell you, I would have told you, no, there's no one home there who thinks that way. And it turns out I would have been wrong. Again, once an emergency is recognized as an emergency, the speed at which those institutions were able to pivot and create these new programs to meet the moment was remarkable. And we've seen all of us change certain things. And the media, took their role and duty to inform us on a daily basis, right? In a way that we hadn't seen, that we certainly don't see on climate. So those are all important similarities and lessons. There are some important differences too. You read my chapter on inequality and the tax chapter. One of the things that was remarkable about the Second World War is that because inequality had been so divisive in the First World War, and rampant, grotesque profiteering in the First World War had so eroded social solidarity and undermined recruitment efforts, we had a government that was quite committed to not letting that happen in the Second World War. And so they brought in all of these measures, both income supports for lower income people and new high-end taxes. That did not happen in the pandemic, right? We remember those early lines and those early weeks of the pandemic when the big line was, we're all in this together. We were not all in it together, it turns out. And the wealthiest billionaires in Canada experienced an increase in their combined wealth of $87 billion in the first year, according to my former colleagues at the CCPA. The kind of profiteering that we have seen in the pandemic was illegal in the Second World War, right? You saw how they structured the excess profits tax, as I outlined it in chapter 8. And we should have done that again. That's why a wealth tax is so important. And that, to come to your last question, Ian, the last part of your question, that is the key echo to the present with the appeal of the Green New Deal. That when you link bold climate action to tackling inequality, the support for the bold climate action doesn't go down, it goes through the roof. And it's why, if we want to truly sell the need for bold climate action and have the society-wide buy-in that we need without the kind of reactionary backlash we've witnessed in the pandemic, people have to feel like everyone's in. And that's why we need a wealth tax. We don't need the wealth tax only to raise money. We also need it so that everyone understands and has faith that this is unfolding in a just and equitable manner. And then there's another important difference. I'll stop after this and let's get the next question. A lot of people point to COVID fatigue, which is super real. It was real even before the last few weeks, and now it's manifest in a particularly antisocial way in the last 2 weeks. But it's real. This has been really hard. And people sometimes, have responded to my thesis by saying, look how quickly people tired of the measures of the pandemic, in less than a year. And now as we hit 2 years, it's exploding in these ways that we are witnessing. And here I am, saying we've got to be in emergency mode for a few years. Except here's the difference, and it's a really important difference. The things that we have been called upon to do in the pandemic are anathema to all of our social instincts. Stay home, isolate. That is hard. The good news about the climate emergency is that the things we are called upon to do are precisely the opposite. To go out and do something grand together. And we can do that for a few years.
That's beautiful. That's really helpful framing. Seth, you touched on our specific context and the feeling of polarization that we have as we're watching on the news, the Freedom Convoy and such. And so there was a bunch of questions that came to us about saying like, we're so fractured now. And I was wondering if you could just have a comment, because I think one of the, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the illusions is maybe like we were so united back then. And so that's one question. And the other one, tying it into the conversation around decolonization. We read an interesting article this past week that talked about what Winona LaDuke calls cowboy and Indian alliances. So
yeah, I know
the possibility of these popular cross-cultural populism is what the author calls it, Zoltan Grossman, where you have like white farmers and fishermen who are often voting Republican, who are coming together with Indigenous peoples to protect local lands and economies. What role could that possibly play, or what role is it playing right now to fight through the polarization that we see here?
Okay, but those are two very different questions. On the fractured piece, I'm going to be a bit disjointed because the truth is I'm still trying to make sense of what we've seen the last 2 weeks, and it's the breadth of it is more than I anticipated. But I will say this: when it comes to taking emergency level actions, to your point, Steve, about we were more united before. Not true. First of all, these things are never unanimous. It wasn't unanimous in the lead up or during World War II. It's clearly not unanimous in the pandemic, and it won't be unanimous in the climate mobilization. And it doesn't need to be ultimately. It needs to be enough. But look, I mean, we had thousands of Nazis marching in the street in Canada before World War II. So, that tendency is always there. And it's also the case from a social cohesion point of view. I've had people say, oh, you're imagining this kind of cross-society mobilization on climate, but back in the war, we were more socially cohesive, right? It wasn't as equal. Again, not true, as you saw in chapter 3. That like when you measure inequality in Canada in terms of the share of income going to the top 1%, and you look at it over the last 100 years, the year at which that inequality peaks at its maximum is 1938, the year before the war. We did not go into World War II a cohesive society. The cohesion and solidarity was forged in the doing. But it takes leadership. It takes the right policies to give people that faith that we are, in fact, all in it together. And we did that to a certain extent, or to a large extent in World War II. And that's where I feel frustrated with the current government on the pandemic. There were things that could have been done that would have been different. And instead, it strikes me that they still remained stuck in that neoliberal frame. The policy response we got on the pandemic was all individualized. They were prepared to spend a lot of money, but it was really just cutting checks, not creating new institutions. And telling people, the policy response is you wear a mask and you get vaccinated, which I strongly support. But the flip side, the things that we do collectively didn't happen, right? In terms of spending the money to make sure all of our schools had proper air filtration, or in particular, you've all read chapter 6. Now you see that I'm fixated on this question of crown corporations. Why do I fixate on crown corporations? Because if you're not creating new public enterprises, the best you can do is try to incentivize somebody else to do what's needed. This is the remarkable thing about the C.D. Howe story in the war, right? Where he just won't wait. He creates 28 new crown corporations. So while the Trudeau government, I think, did a bunch of stuff right in the early months of the pandemic, one of the things that they didn't do was recreate, and I say recreate because we used to have one, a crown corporation to mass produce vaccines. And so what did we do? Now, we've all had our vaccines, plenty of them. But what did we do? We used our economic muscle to outbid poorer countries to secure what we needed, which is, my friends, the opposite of what we did in the war. In the war, we were the arsenal to our allies. But all of these things are fractured, and you know, that's true with a lot of mandated things. I mean, I remember how fractured society was about banning smoking in restaurants and making seatbelts mandatory, and it takes leadership. You just do it, and then it becomes the new normalized. Let me switch gears. You asked about decolonization. That's the chapter you're about to get to. It's one of my favorite chapters, chapter 9. And you'll see, I'm going to give away the opening because you read chapter 6, right? And you see how I'm so impressed with C.D. Howe and everything that he did, right? So I'm writing my book, you know, it's one day in 2019, and I had abandoned my family. I'd gone up to the Sunshine Coast to write quietly for a couple of weeks. And I'm listening to the CBC in the radio in the morning while I'm having my breakfast. And there's a news item about how Trudeau has gone up to Iqaluit to issue an apology for the fact that over the 1950s and 60s, so many Inuit people were ripped out of their communities and their homes and taken with tuberculosis. It was a health emergency, and people had tuberculosis, and it was an emergency. People needed help, but this was the heavy hand, colonial hand, without consent, taking people away to sanatorium in the South. Often people died, their families were never notified. And so Trudeau was rightly up in the North apologizing for that. And then they just mentioned in passing on the news item, the name of the Coast Guard vessel for most of those 20 years who took all those people away. Can you believe it? It was the C.D. Howe. And I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. Sometimes you're writing a book and like something comes down from the sky, and it's like, wow, here's this. Now you can tie together a whole bunch of threads in your book. And it just drove home this point that in the chapters you're about to read, we need our leaders today to be as bold and audacious as the leaders of World War II. And we also need them to be different. I share some stories in that chapter about the importance of Indigenous leadership and rights and title to actually winning on this climate emergency. I don't want to give it all away. I haven't read the chapter yet. So let me just update it with something that's happened since the book came out. Just a few months ago, the Indigenous Environmental Network in the States and Oil Change International published a report in which they tried to tally up the GHGs of all of the fossil fuels that stayed in the ground because of Indigenous-led efforts to block fossil fuel projects. And they tallied it up to be equivalent to 25% of North American greenhouse gas emissions. That leadership is come to our rescue. It's buying us time until such time as our mainstream politics comes into alignment.
Right on. We actually read that paper last week, Seth. Just profound. Okay. Yeah. We've got to follow the lead of host nations in this work. It's key. Hey, Ian, I'm wondering if we can skip the war metaphor question. I think Seth has kind of addressed that, and maybe do Klein versus Klein. Can we do that question? I've got it right here. Ian, I think you'll like this. Seth. Hey,
I just have to say, somebody private message me in the chat that C.D. Howe taught them how to play billiards. It's too funny.
How did you not work that into your book?
I don't know, but
Oh,
I want to share one other post-book story with you. So I have had a lot of nice emails from people who read the book. But my favorites are that a few months after the book came out, I heard after Christmas, because I guess they were kind of sharing it around over the first Christmas after the book came out, I heard from 3 of the grandchildren of C.D. Howe, who are all senior citizens themselves now. And they really liked the book. And in particular, one of them said, and you'll appreciate this because I'm like former CCPA guy. They said, "Thank you for rescuing the Keynesian legacy of our grandfather from the think tank that bears his name." So that was my favorite piece of mail.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. Okay, I think we have time just for a couple minutes response, Seth, to this. A week or so ago, we watched actually an interview between your sister and Winona LaDuke. And at one point in the video, Naomi says this: "I still think that the left hasn't really grappled with its own extractive traditions, that for the most part, we've been arguing over the redistribution of the spoils without fundamentally questioning this model that takes and doesn't respect the right to regenerate." And so there are a few folks who are like, we appreciate like the radical call to decarbonization, and yet are concerned that we're still inhabiting such a resource-dependent model. What kind of response do you have to that?
You're right to be thinking that. And of course, my sister is always right. She's much wiser than I am. I do hope, I hope that you will not take as a point or lesson of the book that we just need to swap out our technology and decarbonize and electrify, and that'll be that. We have to change how we live. We do. And I would say that, you know, often we gravitate to these technological fixes that will spare us the harder, deeper work of what we have to do. And for me, part of the appeal of the Green New Deal, maybe I didn't do a good enough job of articulating this, so I'll try to say it now. It's not just that we're tackling inequality at the same time as we're tackling climate. It's also about a rebalancing of what do we expect people to do on their own, and what will we do together? You know, there's so many, often people say, well, like, as we bring about the great just transition that has to happen, can you maintain the 6-figure salaries that people have become accustomed to in the oil patch? No, we can't. But we can. There's going to be jobs for everyone. They won't all pay at that level. Most of them won't, in fact. And it doesn't matter, because I think part of the related promise of the Green New Deal is so many people feel caught on this treadmill of all of the money that they have to make to cover their children's childcare costs and their children's post-secondary costs and their parents' elder care costs and their pensions, and now instead we can just say about all of those things, chill out. We're going to do those things together. And the pressure you feel to earn all of this money and spend all this money privately, we're going to do more of those things together. So a kind of rebalancing along those lines too. I don't think I articulate it nearly as well as Naomi does. She's a better writer.
You're pretty awesome too, Seth. Ian, I think you have a thank you to offer to Seth.
Yeah, well, I think you speak really well to that, Seth, and thanks for bringing that rebalancing piece into it as well. And I don't know, you can only cover so much in 350 pages, really.
Before you bid me adieu, I am putting the newsletter back in the chat there, the link.
Okay.
I do hope because I'm now that I've moved from researcher guy into campaign mode, my campaigner team members are always like, organize people. Where's the call to action, Klein? So get on the newsletter, and so that you can stay informed. I also want to say these next few weeks are going to be an interesting moment. We're supposed to get a new federal climate plan at the end of March. I think there's going to be some heated debates at the cabinet table. If you reside in the riding of a federal cabinet minister, I'm even happy, follow up with me. Let's talk. You should go meet that person. Lickety split. And I'm happy to chat with you about what does it look like. And this is some of what we do with the climate emergency unit. What does it look like for each of these ministers, for their portfolios to be the people we need them to be to meet the emergency moment? And I'm happy to do some of that visioning with you if you reside in those ridings, so that you can go do it with them. But they now is an important moment. Also want to flag, if you go to the site of 350.org or the Council of Canadians, they have this joint action on March 12th, where they're inviting people across the country to have these fun and creative actions, where they're gonna launch a fake Ministry of Just Transition and invite people to hold fake press conferences as if there was a Ministry of Just Transition and those announcements, and they're looking for people to sign up for those events. So just a few thoughts.
That's awesome.
See people flagging a few. Carla Qualtro, yeah. Carol, maybe follow up with me. I'm just Seth at climateemergencyunit.ca.
Awesome. We'll make sure to communicate all this information that's been in the chat in an email, so you can all sign up for the newsletter and have Seth's contact as well. Seth, you might be interested. I think a bunch of us Mennonites are going to try to organize a Just Transition Act demonstration at Candace Bergen's office in Morden, calling for it. So things are happening here. And again, we just want to say on behalf of this group, how much we appreciate you and the work that you're doing and with the Climate Emergency Unit, and we're supporting, and many of us are going to be getting involved. So why don't we show our appreciation to Seth by raising
everybody.
our hands.
Thank you
So much, brother.
Take care. Good night, everyone.
Have a great night. All right, what we're going to do now, friends, it's 10 after.